Over the weekend, Republicans gathered at Mar-a-Lago to discuss the possibility of a social media platform made for conservatives to rival Facebook and Twitter. That is according to CNBC.
Mike Lindell is also weighing in on the matter. He says the new platform will serve as a Judeo-Christian free speech platform, sans cursing or pornography. Let's take a listen.
Now, people ask me, Eric, they said, you're going to let everything go, porn and swearing and everything? I said, absolutely not. And here's why. We have a thing we found in the Constitution and our founding fathers that defines what free speech is. And Eric, get this, this Judeo-Christian platform we're going to have here, they go by biblical principles. They get to the Supreme Court, you have the 10 Commandments there. And you'll see our definement there. So in other words, you're not going to have porn up there. You're not going to have these sites that contain material that go against our Constitution, go against what our founding fathers put in there. It really defines what free speech is. For example, swearing is now you're not going to be able to swear. There'll be 4 words for sure you can't say. You can't say the C word, the N word, the F word, and you can't use God's name in vain. What a concept, right?
It's a concept indeed. To be clear, they're talking about 2 separate initiatives there. So Democratic strategist Roger Fisk and co-host of the Realignment podcast, Marshall Kossoff, they join us now to discuss. Marshall, there has been so much talk in the discourse about GOP alternative to Twitter, to Facebook. They're going to meet them and put their money where their mouth is, apparently, some of these investors. You work in the tech business. Tell us what you think about these initiatives.
Yeah, there's so much actually in Mike's statement that really needs to be unpacked here. So point 1. No, really, it's funny, but it was a really revealing statement that I hope people really listen to because it reveals a couple of things. So number 1, what he's describing is not a neutral free speech platform. Yeah. If he and his team and the company are going out and saying, look, this is Judeo-Christian in perspective, if it's saying we think these certain words, which a couple of the words aren't even hate speech. Like the F word isn't hate speech. Mm-hmm. So we are going to say that that's not allowed. So it's not quite clear what he means by it. So maybe it's that you can't share articles that have the F word. Maybe you can't post something that says the F word, but that's not free. That's not a free speech platform. And the reason why that's important is basically there isn't anyone who actually wants a completely free speech platform. No one actually wants a perfectly neutral, moderated platform. So the point is everything he's describing is entirely possible, is entirely viable, but it's just really revealing that when they attack Twitter, they say things like Twitter isn't fair, it's biased against conservatives. Well, what he's describing is a platform which is biased against people who love the F word. It's biased against people who aren't Judeo-Christian. And once again, that's his right. Like that's frankly what Section 230 and other rules allow. So that's really an important thing. And then 2, once again, this is a terrible business idea. If anyone is actually looking for investment advice on rising, I would not suggest anyone invest in this, given the fact that it's a solution in search of a problem. So once again, I genuinely do not believe that there is a large, real amount of people whose fundamental complaint with Facebook is that people use the F word on it. Do we actually think that's a real market of people? Do we actually think there's a market of people who are ticked off over the fact that Jack Dorsey is almost certainly a vaguely agnostic, non-Judeo-Christian San Francisco hippy-dippy guy? Like, that's not an actual market of people. So it's really important when you're thinking about these social media companies, the ones that succeed, they're ones that can actually identify a problem, an idea that actually has deeper merit beyond just a narrative. It's a narrative that we want a Judeo-Christian platform. It's not quite an actual problem.
Yeah, Roger, I think that Marshall is right, that Lindell kind of gives up the game there. When conservatives say, we want free speech, it's not really that they want free speech. It's that they want to be able to define the terms of that speech. And so Lindell's comments there, and he even says something very close to that of like, we are going to define what free speech is, are ultimately extraordinarily revealing.
Yeah, first off, good morning. And to quote Marshall, there is a lot to unpack there. I mean, my first thought is, Jesse Eisenberg's line in Facebook when they're in the conference room of the law firm, and he just turns to the Winklevi and says, if you would have invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook, right? Why, if there's this screaming demand out there and there's the tens of millions of people that are begging for this stuff, wouldn't it necessarily kind of already exist, right? I don't think in 2021 that people are just waking up to the idea that there's some level of conservative audience that feels like they need a home. They've stumbled around a couple different times and tried to find these places. The interesting thing about Lindell, who seemingly could light up an entire city with his energy, there's a lot going on there. And just like David Hogg should kind of stick to advocating for gun control rather than making pillows, I think Mr. Lindell should focus on pillows rather than getting into the tech space. And then the idea that they're going to have this kind of, manicured, supposedly free space, and then all the things that he references, I don't know if he's read Judges or Kings or any sections like that in the Bible, but there's a heck of a lot of stuff in there that's not necessarily, just mamby-pamby holding hands kind of let's improve the world kind of stuff. There's plenty of material in there that I guess he himself would have an issue with if someone turned around and talked about on his platform.
Well, I think it's interesting too, more from this perspective, which is, Marshall, in general, what you're seeing is you have these GOP donors, you have Mike Lindell and others. They're like, the tech platforms are biased against us. They want to do something, quote unquote. So what do you say to those people when they're like, I'm really concerned about this? What should they do?
Yeah, so several things. My point around the free speech thing isn't to call Mike a hypocrite. I don't think that's really helpful. It's just to note that once we move beyond the big narratives and debates and actually get into the issues, to your point, Sagar, once we get into the how do you do something about this question, we actually have a better way of thinking about the issue. So if we're really looking at what Mike Lindell was saying, Mike Lindell's objection and the objection of the donors, investors, initial users is they do not trust that Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg or anyone else who runs a major social media platform are going to operate fairly with them. They don't trust the moderation standards. They don't trust that when Jack says it's a free speech platform, but it's truly a free speech platform. Okay, start from there. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to reallocate, create a platform where you and your coalition and your cohort and people who are like you have the ability to wield power, because I don't think anyone believes that Mike Lindell style conservatives are running the show at any major social media company. That's completely all right. The broader point, though, to the do something question is it is perfectly fine and accurate for a conservative to say these platforms are not run by people like me. What I would suggest you do, though, is that rather than be grifter adjacent, because I wouldn't quite call this grift, but I would say it's grift adjacent, you should actually start with what I said at the start, is actually operate from first principles and say, hey, what would this actually look like? Once again, there is zero demand for a Facebook or a Twitter, but it's only for conservatives. The whole point of these platforms is that everyone's on them. That someone made the joke that the reason why Parler wasn't actually a fun experience before the AWS debacle was that if there are no libs to dunk on, what's the point if you're a conservative? That actually speaks to a deeper truth about what these things are. People want to debate. People want to argue. If you actually look at what the actual conservative argument is in good faith, it's that conservatives, actual users, actually people, don't trust that they have the ability to engage in that public square to the same degree. So once again, people should focus on the actual problem rather than the actual fake narrative. The problem is not that there's a small Facebook group for 10 million conservatives. That's pretty easy to do. You don't need to raise $1 billion to do that. That's pretty straightforward. There are conservative dating sites. This has been a thing on the internet literally forever. So actually identify the problem and think hard about that if this is something you want to focus on as a conservative.
Right.
Very interesting points, gentlemen.
Yes,
Great to have you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More Rising for you after this.